The thing that you have to do before you talk about what is happening now, I think it's probably useful to go back, and you have to really start at the end of the great financial crisis. And the reason is the government acknowledges that you have to really ring fence and protect consumers. If you look at the securities laws, they're meant to protect them at all costs. But the reason is because sometimes you want people to make good decisions, and if you give them a bunch of firepower, they're just going to spend it. And what we really did was we gave folks just a ton of money. And what did they do? They acted rationally. They spent it. Now we have to take it all back. I don't think that's going to be as easy or as simple as people think. It's stunning that, the reason the stock market went up, dollar for dollar, was actually tied to growth in the M2 money supply. The correlation was 0.92. So for every dollar that the Fed printed, the stock market went up by 92 cents. So it stands to reason that if the Fed is going to take $3 to $5 trillion of value out, then we have to re-rate the equity markets by $3 to $5 trillion at a minimum. And then you have to re-rate and re-baseline for earnings. And so that's probably another 20 or 30. You're assuming that all of a sudden, demand is stable, but it's not necessarily stable. Demand contraction, yes, people get fired, but then also new job openings change. There's fewer of them. They're more specific. Again, we're at the beginning of the beginning. For all of us that lived through 2000, this was 4 years of sheer hell and a grind. Now we have $30 trillion that we have to work through the economy, a recession we have to overcome, a war we need to end, and people all of a sudden assume that 2 or 3 rate hikes and 5 or 6 months of headlines are enough. And on the margin, maybe they're right. But from my perspective, it's an observation that we're at the beginning of something that just fundamentally has to take some amount of time to work its way through the system. And so I don't understand why anybody would give up their liquidity in this moment right now. Why would you? Why would I give up $100 million of cash in my bank account? I would not do that.
The people in Russia are suffering during this. The people in Ukraine are being murdered. I mean, how does it end?
The problem is that Biden engaged the United States in a proxy war without our real explicit discussion, number one. And then number two is then we pulled and we pressured Europe to really draw a hard line, but then now are kind of working around it so that the countries that suffer the most are Europe. Now, I think you're starting to see the tea leaves, though. There was a group of European leaders, I think it was Macron, Draghi, and one other person, who went to Ukraine. And if I had to bet, I think the message was we need to find an organized detente here, because there is, according to Europe, a Lehman-like situation in terms of economic contagion that could manifest over the next months. So I think that the end game is probably some organized, negotiated detente and ceasefire. I don't think anybody will be happy with it, but I think by and large, Russia is and has won, meaning they've won economically. They're selling oil like it's not going out of style. It's just not selling it to Europe and to America. They're selling it to China. They're selling it to Africa. We engage in economic sanctions, and I was the first one to say, hey, this could really work, and this could be a roadmap for how to do it. And it turned out this is the roadmap for how not to do it. You can't, on the front door, say, here are these sanctions, and then walk around the back door and basically open the door for them. These sanctions were so porous as to be like Swiss cheese. We focused on virtue signaling acts, confiscating a plane or a boat or a house, but we didn't focus on the structural things we needed to actually make the mandate that we believe to be just to come to life. And so Russia's completely worked around it. Their economy effectively is thriving. So what have we gained? It was the exact opposite of what we tried to do. Russia's current account surplus more than tripled in the first 4 months of the year. Prices surged for oil and gas imports, and imports plunged under the weight of sanctions. Well, if you're Putin and you're looking at this, you're like, wow, maybe I should be under sanctions more often. What country should I invade next? So not only did our sanctions package not work, and not only is the Treasury flailing around now trying to find even more backdoors, we actually opened a very dangerous precedent, which is now we allowed oil to settle in currencies that are not just the United States dollar. And now Russia and China are trading and settling in CNY. That's not good for us. This is not how you preserve the reserve currency of America. If you have a country that has existed in some way, shape, or form, the borders could be blurry, but roughly, for hundreds and hundreds of years, and in some cases thousands of years, where internally the population of that country views themselves, in a great way. They don't feel like their country is a meaningless nothing country. Any attempt to economically humiliate such a country tends to have failed in the past and will continue to fail. And there tends to be other countries who view it as one of these things where, well, if them, then why not us? And then they sort of, in a backhanded way, support everybody. So we end up in this odd situation where we are picking fights we cannot win. And the consequences for us are economically really damaging. And then the consequences for everybody else to stay on the sidelines is like economic prosperity. That doesn't make any sense.